I'm John Spiridakis. I'm an actor and a writer, a poet. Larry, my partner here, we've been working together in one capacity or another since 2000. I grew up, worshiping at the font of famous monsters of filmland and Edgar Allan Poe and Planet of the Apes. And I mean, that was my world. It's been fun to discover through Larry how much we have in common. We're virtually the same age, and he grew up in New York. I grew up in New Jersey. We both kind of, I think, lived in our imaginations a lot, and that has manifested itself in our chosen careers.
I'm a filmmaker, but in front of the camera and behind the camera, and among other things, my company, Glass Eye Picks, has produced a number of independent horror films, some directed by myself, some by the likes of Ty West and Jim Mickle, people who've gone on to some success after working at a low budget with my own company. One of my favorite projects that Glass Eye does is called Tales from Beyond the Pale, which is a radio or audio series, individual spooky tales, and I curate that and produce it with my pal Glenn McQuaid, who's a filmmaker and also a man of letters and a Poe fan, I might add. So we make half-hour standalone scary audio dramas, all original by writers from the horror scene of today, both books and movies, and we sort of found a nice niche where they could come and maybe test out a script that might become a feature film or something completely unique. And then sometime well into the 5th season of this series, John had the idea of reading an existing work. And although we cherish our originality, we thought, well, it would be nice to celebrate some of the forefathers of this genre. And who better than Edgar Allan Poe? He also has suitably short pieces. And so John proposed that we do this. So we call it a Tales from Beyond the Pale reading. And there's only one of them.
The tales that Larry was alluding to, and we should definitely acknowledge Glenn McQuaid, who's our silent partner today. But Glenn and Larry created the concept of the radio broadcast of Tales from Beyond the Pale. And Larry happens to be an outstanding saxophonist, which I knew. And so I sort of pitched this concept of Sax of the Red Death, where we just wanted to play off the vocal and the sax together and see what direction it would take. I discovered Poe at a very young age, and I read as many tales as I could get my hands on. But my venue into his works was through the prose and what I call the poetry of his prose, because I found that just so evocative and so moving. And even at a young age, the Mask of the Red Death spoke to me because it was just so concise. It was a gut punch. It was short and so intense, and just the imagination that Poe manifests in that story boggles my mind every time I read it. That I knew that if we were going to do this, do a tale reading, we knew it was going to be Poe. So I sort of pitched the idea to Larry. He was all in because he also loves Poe, and then it was a good excuse to noodle with the saxophone.
I thought one thing that Glenn said, he listened to the piece. So I put down 2 tracks of saxophone, and it was interesting. I just played along to John's talking, and then I did it twice. I was sort of finding a way to put a musical interpretation to the story as it unfolds. I also imagined putting some sound effects in, just very specific ones of the clock and so on, because one thing about Tales is we really try to push the envelope of sound design. But Glenn said, don't add sound effects. Go back to the sax and do the effects with the
sax.
That was a great choice. And so the clock is just the way you click on the sax keys. And so it was nice to keep it literally sax and voice.
And of course, I would love to take a shot at the Raven at some point. It's intimidating, but it would be a glorious thing, I think, to explore with the sax and the vocal, But I guess the next project specifically that we've been talking about would be Cask of Amontillado.
We've always had Poe lovers in our midst because, of course, he is such a essential a pillar of the horror genre, which we bask in merrily. Well, please go to talesfrombeyondthepale.com, and you can find this particular episode that we're describing. It's actually the last thing that we've put out because we're in the midst of preparing a new season. My company is called Glass Eye Pix, PIX.com, and whatever. You can find it on Instagram and Twitter or X or whatever it's called. But that's where you can see all the movies that John and I have made together, and Glenn and I have made, and the radio plays are referenced there, and our upcoming projects.
My name is A.A. Rubin. I'm a writer. I write everything from comics to literary fiction, formal rhyming poetry, to science fiction and fantasy, and almost everything in between. I've always been drawn to Poe along with other romantic poets like Coleridge and people like that. And it's, what originally drew me more to the poetry aspect even than the short stories, although I do love the short stories, is that Poe, just the craft of the poetry, the way he uses meter, the way he uses sound and sense devices, like assonance and consonants, different but especially the meter and the way that he's able to create a mood, not only through the content, but also through the technical, I guess, the technical wizardry of the poetry. Into That Darkness Peering, written by me, illustrated by Marika Brucianu, is a collection of 32 Gothic horror poems and microfictions written by me that are fully illustrated by Marika in pen and ink and very, very unique black and white style that she has. The project actually started because from my involvement in the comics world, my entire feed in the month of October is filled with these wonderful pieces of art, this Inktober that all the artists are posting. One of my friends, who's a comics writer, created a group one year that he called Pagetober, where writers would get involved and you would give a prompt or a panel to an artist throughout the month of October, and they would illustrate, and then you would have some content as well. You'd get to collaborate, maybe find someone with whom to collaborate on a project in the future, that type of thing. But I remembered the idea the next year, and I had worked with Marika before, and I had this idea for a Gothic horror collection. I knew that for a Gothic horror collection that Marika would be my first choice as an illustrator. Her illustrations are spectacular. She had been posting a number of things on her feed. I had worked on a short comics project with her previously, a couple of years before. That was actually my first published comic. I reached out to her with the idea, and she liked it. So we started doing it during October, and we both liked it so much that like, this just can't end with a bunch of social media posts. Let's collect them, let's add more to it, and let's make a book out of it. So that's how Into That Darkness Peering was born. The title, obviously, Into That Darkness Peering, comes from The Raven, and each section of the book is titled based around a quote from Edgar Allan Poe as well. So we have a section called Invisible Things. We have a section called Dreams Within Dreams. We have a section on the Night's Plutonian Shore, etc. There are 5 chapters in total, and they kind of frame the entire narrative. So not only is it, because it's classic Gothic horror, it's inspired by Poe to begin with, like everything in the genre is, but because we used these specific Poe quotes to kind of frame the story, Poe provides the framework for the entire work and kind of ties together the pieces. So it's, I mean, each piece can be read as a standalone piece, but when you tie it together within the framework of Poe, it's like it's all part of the same dream or nightmare, and the Poe quotes really provide the framework that ties the whole thing together. So poetry-wise, I have a number of poems coming out that are in the near future or in the recent past that were inspired directly by Poe. If I were to choose one that's the most direct inspiration for my poetry, it would be The Bells. As I mentioned earlier, I really like the way he uses sound and sense and rhythm and meter and all of that, and I think The Bells is a great example. Favorite of the way that he changes from the beginning of the poem what the bells are, with the vowel sounds from the beginning to the end of the poem, where the classic Poe horror comes in the final section. That's always been a poem that's inspired me as a poet. I would also say that my novel, I say work in progress, although I'm finished the first draft and I'm going to start querying it probably in January, is there's a scene where Sherlock Holmes meets Dupin, an older Dupin, obviously, because he's of the years difference, but in those sections, obviously, it's inspired by Poe's mystery short, The Surrealari. And then you could also follow me on my website, where I have a blog, www.aarubin.com.